All right, we are live. Good to see both of you.
Good to
Awesome.
see you.
Yeah. All right, well, let me cue our intro and then we'll get started. All right. So, how are you two doing?
I'm tired. I'm not gonna lie. My brother and I went to see Five Finger Death Punch and Marilyn Manson last
Oh
night.
gosh.
And then I worked today, so I didn't get like 5 hours of sleep.
So,
But it was fun.
your hair's
And
looking cute today, by the way.
oh, thank
It
you.
does.
Thank you.
So,
And I didn't do a thing to it. Isn't that funny? It's like when I don't try is when it looks the best. So I ought to just leave it alone.
That's when I get the most compliments on my hair is when I wear it like I just literally spray it with water and go, and everybody's like, "Your hair's so cute." I'm like, "Okay,
thanks.
maybe I should do that more often."
Wasting time when we put in the effort, huh?
Yeah, it's almost as if it was meant for you, right?
Yeah, seriously. I mean, I always like my hair, I just let it dry from naturally. And it's always just, to me, it seems like it's too frizzy because it's naturally curly. And it's like, ugh. But you know what? Other people like the don't notice any difference. It's
I
just me.
think it looks fluffy and pretty.
Oh, well,
So
thank you. It does
I
look
mean,
a lot
I don't
better.
see. I have as a former curly, or as a fellow curly girl. Yeah, I can appreciate feeling like you're frizzy, but I don't see that when I see your hair.
Yeah, well,
It
that's
just
Yeah, I
looks
don't
pretty
see
and
frizz either.
that's good.
so.
You know, we're all the hardest on ourselves, right?
Yes, exactly. You know me, I'm the queen of that.
So true. But that's okay. You know, it's kind of hard to find sometimes that balance between self-reflection and being too hard on ourselves.
Yeah,
You're right about
I would
that.
rather err on the side of being hard on myself than not be self-aware, you know?
Right.
So I've always tried to work on that. I
Yeah,
mean, you know, I've done the
exactly.
best I could, I guess.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. Awesome. Okay, so if you guys are ready to get started, we can jump in. And just for anyone who's new, I always forget, we are going through this book, which is a textbook. It is called Ketogenic, the Science of Therapeutic Carbohydrate Restriction in Human Health. It is taking us, we're taking our time getting through this because we're getting lots of discussion. We are still in chapter 1 on page 34. And we left off with a section called The Story Behind the Formation and Adoption of the 1977 USDA Dietary Goals for Americans. It's a large section. So you guys, maybe we can break it up so we don't have one person reading forever. I can start and read until the first natural break if you want.
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay. So this is section 1.3.2. Okay. So the 1972 U.S. presidential election contested by California Republican Richard Nixon and South Dakotan Democrat George McGovern provided the two keys that drove the adoption of the 1977 USDA dietary goals for America. First, incumbent U.S. President Richard Nixon was confronted by a losing war in Vietnam, rising food prices, unhappy housewives, and a disgruntled farming community. In part, this was because in 1971, Nixon ended the Bretton Woods Agreement, linking the U.S. dollar and the gold standard. Consumer prices skyrocketed. Nixon appointed Earl Butz as a Secretary of Agriculture with two orders. increase the wealth of U.S. farmers, and bring down food prices. His solution to both problems was the production of maize or corn on an industrial scale by farmers receiving large government subsidies to cultivate corn on all their available land. All this newly grown maize had to be eaten. So the challenge became to convince the world that cereals and grains are healthier than natural foods high in animal fat and protein, in which humans had built their health and Americans their nation. The consequence was that cheap, nutrient poor, energy dense plant crops, including corn, wheat, and soy, began to replace the nutrient dense animal foods on which America and Americans had thrived. Nixon won the 1972 U.S. presidential election in a landslide. As a result of this humiliating defeat, McGovern was losing the support of his party leadership to the point that by the end of 1972, he and his wife considered emigrating. By 1976, McGovern's sole remaining center of political influence, the chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs, was under threat of disbandment and incorporation into a nutrition subcommittee under the Senate Committee on Agriculture, resulting in a drastic reduction in the committee's budget and staff. In an attempt to save his committee and political career, McGovern announced a proposal for changes to the American diet in the form of dietary goals for the United States, with the goal of avoiding the quote-unquote epidemic of killer diseases. While the move prevented the dissolution of McGovern's committee, it still suffered major budget and staffing cuts. McGovern fought back by shifting the focus of his committee to the role of diet in health, and specifically the emerging problem of obesity and coronary heart disease in the United States. McGovern had been strongly influenced by Dr. Jeremiah Stamler, MD, who, together with Dr. Henry Blackburn, MD, were perhaps Key's most ardent acolytes. In his book, published in 1963, Stamler had promised the following. So this is a quote from Stamler's book. The definitive proof that middle-aged men who reduce their blood cholesterol will actually have far fewer heart attacks waits upon diet studies now in progress. Possibly their diet changes will have no effect in preventing heart attacks, but massive evidence from human and animal studies gives every promise that they will. The vital choice in question for us all is simply this. Should we sit by and wait for the last I to be dotted and T to be crossed before we act, or should we begin to adopt changes that very probably will protect us? Changes in our way of life that cannot do any harm. Yours is the decision. So that's a kind of a logical starting point.
Wow.
Yes, that didn't turn out so well.
Yeah, like his statement about changes that cannot do any harm.
Woo.
That's kind of scary because he was the head of this committee, right? And for the whole US government, and he's supposed to have a good understanding of nutrition. And here he's recommending a complete change, like a drastic change in the diet of our country. And he thinks that it cannot do any harm.
And the fact that he didn't want to wait for the studies and, the actual science to come through, let's just go ahead and push it through because it can't hurt anything, right?
Right. Cynthia says, am I the only one who was infuriated by this information? No, greed and ego over health.
Stamler, this is Stamler's quote, right? The way I read this. And what's odd.
Hang on, I gotta close my door. Sorry,
what's odd?
In the next room, banging drawers open and closed.
What's odd here is that if you watch footage of the McGovern hearings, he basically quotes Stamler. Like he basically says, we do not have time to wait, because there were scientists on the opposing side saying, we don't know the ramifications. This can be disastrous, basically. And then he popped off, and it was he probably just directly quoted from the book, if you want to know the truth. But I find that odd. I didn't realize that this was, this is virtually what he said, in what McGovern said in the hearing when he was questioned. But this is Stamler's quote.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's obviously trying to save himself, right? And his position, because his committee was, going to be disbanded.
Mm-hmm.
So he saved his committee and his position, and he put the whole population. And even though it's the U.S., it's like, okay, this is just what happened in the U.S., but we all know that so many other countries are watching what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of countries, what if we decide to do something, they'll kind of slowly over time start to incorporate those things as well. And it's like, we can see how our Western diet has impacted the world in such a bad way. So, all righty. Okay. All right. Kim is gone. Where'd she go?
She might have had to blow her nose.
All right. Carrie, do you want to just pick up where I left off then?
Sure. At the time, Stamler was chairman of the 1970 Inter-Society Commission for Heart Disease Resources, Prevention of Cardiovascular Disease. Okay. Primary prevention of the atherosclerotic diseases. Predictably, on the basis of Stamler's personal convictions, his commission advocated that U.S. citizens must be told to eat less fat, especially saturated fat, based on Key's twin hypotheses, still unproven. The presumption at the time was clearly that this dietary change would drastically reduce the number of heart attacks and strokes among middle-aged U.S. men, as the fat calories removed from the diet would be replaced by an increased protein intake.
That didn't happen though, right?
No, it did not, because some other people got their greedy little hands on the guidelines and totally messed that up.
Yeah, it ended up being carbs, sugar, instead of protein. Yeah. Interesting that they thought that was what was going to happen, was increased protein, which isn't generally protein as more expensive than the carbs, and here they're subsidizing all of these farmers with these grain crops. Like, why would they think that protein would be the natural default that people would turn to when the grains were providing these inexpensive food products?
I don't know that they really thought that. I think they may have
think it through.
They may have said that was the intent, or maybe they said that that's what they thought. But like you said, with all the cost, because meat is more expensive than like bread. Yeah.
So why didn't they, if they wanted people to eat protein, why didn't they subsidize the ranchers?
Exactly. Yeah. In other words, they knew what they were doing. They were talking out of one side of their mouth and doing something else.
And like Cynthia said, often protein comes with fat, which they wanted us to reduce. Exactly. So yeah, the fact that it states that that's what they assumed, that was the presumption, that was really like, obviously
I don't believe it. I don't believe that they truly believe that.
They may have said that, but they didn't put the money from the government subsidies, they didn't put their marketing behind that at all.
They didn't put the money where their mouth was.
No, not at all. Not at all. So, all right.
But in the 7 years between 1970 and 1977, the political landscape in the United States had changed dramatically, With Butts in charge of U.S. agriculture, any fat removed from the diet would now have to be replaced with cheap grains, not expensive proteins. Oh, well, look, we just got a little ahead of ourselves.
There you go. They just
So
need
that's
to
what
ask us-
happened.
They just need to ask
You
us
all
what
read
to
this
do.
ahead of time. Is that what this is?
I really didn't.
No, we just know stuff.
It's almost as if we've read this exact little section in like 4 books at least.
Yeah, no kidding.
Almost
No,
as
that's
if.
true.
That's right.
That's true. A key belief driving the thinking of Keyes, Stamler, and McGovern was that the U.S. diet had changed radically in the years immediately preceding the start of the coronary heart disease epidemic, usually considered to have begun in the mid to late 1920s. They were convinced, without supporting evidence, that a dietary shift away from plant-based foods, grains, legumes, fruits, and vegetables, toward animal-derived foods, meat, poultry, seafood, eggs, and dairy, was driving the rise in coronary heart disease in the United States. Based on this untested assumption, on 27th of July, 1976, Senator McGovern held a Senate Select Committee meeting probing the potential role of diet in the development of coronary heart disease. The main speaker was cardiac surgeon Dr. Theodore Cooper, then Assistant Secretary for Health. Dr. Cooper provided a body of unsubstantiated evidence that removing fat from the diet would improve the health of all Americans. He recommended that this should be achieved by reducing dietary fat, particularly saturated fat intake, which would in turn, 1, lower plasma cholesterol concentrations, Keyes' twin hypotheses, and 2, reduce obesity incidence by lowering lipid calories. He persisted, there is nothing that I know of in this recommendation that would in any sense be harmful.
Wow. No foresight there at all.
It just really makes you wonder if they actually, any of them understood human physiology. I just don't get it, because if you really did understand what causes, I just don't know. And of course they totally, I get that it took a while for them to determine smoking was so bad for heart disease, but to think, but their main driver apparently was, heart disease, and yet, like it said, unsubstantiated evidence. So
well, it's like when you read things like this, you got to know that this is still going on now and directing current policies that are being made or changes in policies. That there's still, whoever's making our decisions for us as a nation, they're still being presented with unsubstantiated evidence.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like we need to have an official, and I hate calling them fact checkers, because those fact checkers are often so wrong, but we need to have I feel like we need to have an official person who really knows how to look at clinical trials,
or a true committee of people like Dr. Bickman, people like that who are, let's see, Chris Palmer, Georgia Ede, people who are really esteemed in that world, in the world of research, and have committees with well-educated people like that who do know how to interpret, that they've conducted studies. And that's not to say that I know they're like, quote unquote, on our side, but it would be a diverse committee that has representation, in a sense, kind of like government has representation of different points of view on laws and things that should be passed. And likewise, this committee would then sift through and be able to point out BS in the studies, and that if they couldn't work it out, then,
Yeah.
if it couldn't logically be, and I don't know, that may be like, then with our government now, sometimes it seems like they can't get anything done, but yet I was always taught that it was like that in a sense, because there was supposed to be debate. It was supposed to
Yeah.
be more difficult to get a law passed.
Yeah.
So I think a committee like that if they would have had something like a true committee that wasn't being just, there was a committee, but unfortunately, and I guess, now that I say that, the people who were questioning it were just steamrolled.
Right. Well, and one of the bigger underlying problems, is that we naturally would assume that if something's published in an esteemed journal, that it's been vetted out and it's actually really good, high quality study. And that is not the case at all. And, I think that our journals, and I'm hoping that people are starting to wake up and see that you can't necessarily rely on, just because it's been published in a journal doesn't mean that you don't have to do your due diligence and really check it. But our politicians don't know that, really a lot of doctors don't even realize that. So it would be helpful if the journals themselves would raise their standards, or at least give a rating system or something saying like, this is the top quality study. And I don't know what the solution is, but it's like bad information. It's very difficult.
No matter, we could think of a million solutions, and everyone will have problems, because there's going to be people coming from every, and ideally you would have people from every, kind of walk of life, from every background that you could think of, and esteemed people, as well as I think that you should have some just regular common sense people on there that can, listen to the evidence presented and say, that doesn't sound right, or that sounds right, or, whatever. But it's like, it becomes like religion, and almost becomes, when we're talking diet, people are so dogmatic about their diet. And I'm guilty. I am. I don't like to admit it, but I am, you don't like to think that what you're eating could be wrong, especially when it makes you feel so good. And so you don't often like to consider. That's why I like to look at, like, okay, there are plenty of, people who are eating a different way who are healthy. What are they doing and what am I doing that have something in common, and try to look at it that way. But it's just, wow, it's just there's so much information to begin with. And then, can you imagine a committee with vegetarians, vegans, carnivores, regular standard American people on it? It would be, you'd never get anything done.
No.
Because,
one thing that they probably could do, though, at the very least, if they had the cojones to do it, would be to, and I'm not somebody who suggests by any means taxing certain food. I believe in freedom of choice. So if you want to eat a certain thing, if you want to eat sugar or whatever, that is your choice as a free person. However, for us to be told the truth about these things so that we can make educated choices, like even about the healthy whole grains. And it's been said that some people don't want continuous glucose monitors to be available to everybody, because then people would start seeing for themselves how these foods are affecting them. And there might be some truth to that statement, because once people are educated and they know better, then it's like, oh, I'm not eating that stuff.
Well, I think we could, sorry, Carrie, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
It's okay.
I was just going to say, I think we could get a good start if we would start having doctors be more educated in nutrition, because they are supposed to be the purveyors of our health care, right? But it's almost like they're missing a link, you know?
Or to tie human physiology with food. Because if they did, they would know logically, especially for people who are diabetic, that you don't recommend that they eat all these healthy whole grains and
Yeah.
pasta and low fat stuff, because that's going to make your diabetes worse. And then, of course, the
It's
problem
just,
is it depends on the type of nutrition that they're educated in. There
yeah,
again, if
that's,
they're,
I was just thinking
yeah,
of that, and I'm like, well, they could be educated in nutrition all they wanted, but if it was just the same old propaganda instead of like actual, legit stuff. And I'm not just saying low carb. I don't think everybody has to be low carb,
right.
but for somebody who's metabolically unhealthy, it certainly is good for me.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point is of those of us who are low carb, carnivore, keto, or whatever, is, it needs to be on the list of legitimate options for people.
Mhm.
And, doctors will just throw it out the window and not even consider that this might be an actual legitimate option for people. And even if they don't feel comfortable telling people, okay, you need to do this for the rest of your life, they should still have that. We need to have enough science and enough, testimonies all over the world about it, so that they can feel comfortable saying, hey, why don't you try this, give this a
Yeah.
try and see how you feel. And then they can jump in and they can monitor their blood work, and they can look at all of the things that will make them feel comfortable knowing that, okay, this patient's doing okay on this diet, they're safe. And I think it would work so much better. So that's just something that we need to work towards, is getting it listed as at least legitimate.
Yeah. And I
My
think
brother
thing
he had blood work done. There is hope. I really do believe there is hope. He had blood work done and was just sharing with me that there was something that had come back. And he doesn't pay attention like I do as to like the detail of the labs, like if it's LDL, HDL, or whatever, but that something had come back high, and they said, oh, that's not something to worry about. That's just because you're on a low carb diet. And I'm like, that,
Wow. That
I mean,
person knew
he's not
something.
seeing a, what you would call a specific low carb doctor or a functional, practitioner or anything like that. So I'm still seeing little niggles here and there of things that can give us hope.
Nice. That's really encouraging for sure.
That's good to know. And I think that as doctors and even nurses, we could share people's lab results with them a little bit better, because often we will do labs. And if it's in the inpatient setting, especially, we might not say anything at all about it. Now, and that includes if there's abnormals. But if, especially in the outpatient setting, I feel like your doctor should really explain a little better your abnormals and what could possibly be causing them, and have more of a sit down thing rather than just call you and say, oh, everything is normal, or whatever. It's just,
Mhm.
or just mailing you a copy. It
Yeah.
just seems like we could provide a little bit more education, like just
And
from a
then,
nurse perspective. That's something I see.
yeah. And I saw that too. And in the inpatient setting, isn't a lot of consistency. It goes from nurse to nurse. I noticed, because, like, say for example, there is an abnormal lab value. Often it will trigger a change in treatment. And so you may be coming and giving, medications to your patient. And if the nurse just doles out the medication, doesn't educate on the medications as they're going, then they're going to miss the opportunity to say, okay, the doctor added this medication. The reason is because there was a change in this particular lab value. So you have, each of us nurses have an opportunity
Yeah.
to provide that education, but not everybody does. And it may not be the doctor that tells them, okay, I'm going to change up your treatment a little bit to help correct this lab value, but the nurse should be doing it, at least when they're passing out meds.
Yeah, they should be.
Yeah, but they're not. A lot of them don't. So I always did. Every time I passed meds, I always took the time to tell everybody, as I'm unpackaging them and everything, I would tell each patient what I was giving them and why. But
Yeah, I usually tell them what their meds are, and then usually they're familiar with them because they're the meds that they take every day. If there's anything new, we always go over it. But, I don't know. It's just like whenever I have a patient who has labs drawn, especially if it's beyond the routine daily stuff, and even if the routine daily stuff has abnormals, I'll tell them, okay, your, potassium was a little low. We're going to be giving you some runs, or we're going to be giving you some oral potassium or whatever. And, usually they don't ask beyond that, but I don't know. I just feel like a lot of times that's a missed opportunity for us to discuss.
it is.
Lab value.
I agree. It's not necessarily, I mean, I know that I've worked for a few different hospitals, and, it's usually mentioned in the nurse orientation. I found, and when it comes to recommending, don't forget, make sure you educate patients on their medications and stuff. But beyond that, I've never really had a lot of emphasis, like once you get in the job and you're working. And I don't recall seeing, at nurse, meetings and little huddles, them reminding us to do that. It's just presumed that we're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Do you mind? I'm going to quickly open my window. I've got today's my day of interruptions. I had my dog scratching on my door a minute ago because he's upset because my husband's outside in the backyard and my room is stuffy. So it's like, okay, sorry about that, guys.
All right. So Cooper also warned of the role of carbohydrates in the causation of obesity. This was then common knowledge. But it is true that the consumption of high carbohydrate sources with the induction of obesity constitutes a very serious public health problem in the underprivileged and economically disadvantaged. He also acknowledged that personally he was carbohydrate intolerant or insulin resistant due to his type 4 hyperlipidemia, which is essentially carbohydrate sensitive hypertriglyceridemia. Okay, I was wondering what that was. He understood that carbohydrates pose a greater risk to his own health than did dietary cholesterol and perhaps dietary fat. I am classified type 4. As a type 4, my lipid levels are much more subject to elevation if I consume large amounts of carbohydrate or alcohol. I have no real problem in consuming a reasonable amount of cholesterol. Critically, Dr. Cooper failed to consider the repercussions of his dietary recommendations should a majority of Americans be insulin resistant like him. Now that's interesting. I don't think I ever heard that part when this was talked about.
Yeah, I didn't.
No, I didn't either.
Wow.
So, which is weird because here he was having these personal health issues or considered issues and seemed to understand that the carbohydrates were the problem. But he's also the one providing this unsubstantiated evidence about removing fat from the diet, improving the health of Americans. And what did he think was going to happen?
And what did he think people were going to eat if they're not eating fat and they're not eating carbs? I mean, what?
Right. And like Cynthia said, if you're not going to, you don't really lower your fat often without lowering your protein intake.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, then that leaves carbs left for people. And he himself seemed to know the impact of the carbs on his own health. It seems like I don't understand these people. I really don't.
I mean, it's frustrating because you think, okay, everybody's different. We always say that, oh, everybody's body's different. And yeah, but no,
Right.
I mean, we all have the same type of biochemistry going on in our body. I don't know what this is, but because it's me leading
emphasis.
Dude.
Emphasis.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't really understand. I have to plug my computer in.
When I hear everybody's different, I think like my mind automatically goes to everybody has their own individual set of things that are off and imbalanced in their bodies.
Yes.
Like, not that our bodies are supposed to work differently when we're
Right.
working optimally. It's just everyone is different in that your problem may be different than my problem. Your underlying imbalance is different than mine.
Mhm.
And then if we start from a baby, everybody's not so different.
Right. But, well, that also depends on the health of the mother and how what the baby gets exposed to in utero. So you have to start back even further.
I mean, there are a lot of factors to consider, but I think basic good nutrition from the perspective of proper human diet,
Mhm.
lower carb, higher protein, higher fat, at least moderate fat, but emphasis on lower carb and low sugar and going along with that. I think that that diet would do well for anyone, unless they are that little percentage of the population that would definitely know from birth if they had some sort of disease of processing of proteins, or I don't know. I can't even remember what it's called, but
I know what you're talking
like a
about.
genetic variation.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because that is a legitimate thing, is people do have
But it's very, 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 very rare. And you would have been to see, like Dr. Berry always says, you would have been to see like a geneticist from an infant.
Right.
You would be probably very sick as a child.
Well, and that's why it's really important to get the education out there, especially to young parents, and so that they can start their kids off in a healthy way. And how would all of us be if we had got nothing but good nutrition from the beginning? I mean, now we're trying to make up for a lack of bad nutrition and lifelong poor eating habits. And it takes a lot of time and effort to correct those things.
Looking back, I feel like I always say I've always eaten awful, but I don't really, that's not really true, because my mother didn't buy a lot of sweet foods and stuff. She
I
didn't buy a
didn't
lot of
either.
sodas. She didn't buy a lot of, processed stuff. It was mostly, I mean, we ate a lot of canned green beans, canned corn, stuff that was quick and easy, but it would be, spaghetti, homemade spaghetti, it
Yep.
would be, chili homemade, tacos homemade, things like that, that maybe weren't the best thing that I could eat right now. But like, as somebody who is metabolically healthy, I don't think, I mean, I was tiny, and I seemed to be pretty healthy all growing up until I hit about 19. And then,
Yeah. Well, it takes time for the effects of your childhood nutrition sometimes to catch up. And if it's not blatant like that, and like for me, it wasn't blatant either, as far as like my sweets and stuff. Our home wasn't full of sweets and garbage food. My mom did like to bake, but I'd get 2 cookies maybe once or a week or whatever. But with my upbringing, it was all the bad seed oils. It was the margarines and the Crisco, and
yeah, we did use margarine.
the quality
Yep.
the quality of the food was not good. It was, I mean, we were living off of a really tight budget too. So
We were too.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it, because the margarine and stuff was cheaper than butter. I don't think my mother was intentional, because she didn't worry about like whether she was getting fat or not. I mean, that wasn't something that was talked about in our house, because it wasn't an issue, but money was an issue. And so there would be the generic store brands or just whatever. And we didn't buy sodas. We didn't have junk food and stuff available. Like I had friends whose parents would get like a pallet of knee-high drinks when they went to the grocery store. We didn't have anything like that.
Pallet.
Yeah, like a pallet of knee-high drinks.
Oh my God.
And they kept them in the garage, and they would just bring in so many and put them in the refrigerator. And I thought that was heaven. Okay. I mean, I was like 13 and I'd go over to their house and I was like, yeah, all right. These people are, I loved the peach knee high. Oh my gosh. I just thought that was good, but I didn't get it very often. I would get it there.
Oh yeah. I
So
didn't
we
get stuff
didn't
like that at home
have,
either.
yeah, we just did not have junk, but my mother refused to buy what she would call kid cereals and sugary
Mine too.
cereals. She would get like cornflakes, but I mean, of course, cornflakes were plain. And of course, when she wasn't looking, we'd drown them in sugar.
Well, we had a sugar bowl my mom would bring out that for breakfast if we were having cereal. There was a sugar bowl with a spoon in it. My dad like would take his plain Cheerios and sprinkle sugar all over it. And
What we would do.
yeah,
When
my
Mama
mom
wasn't
was
looking, if she caught us, she would, like smack at us a little bit. But
Yeah. My mom was big on oatmeal and like eggs and stuff for breakfast, something that would be quick, but she always wanted me to get some protein, and then it would be several things. Like she always tried to balance it,
my mom too.
I can
Yeah,
remember
we had oatmeal and cream of wheat.
Yeah, I did too. I didn't start getting unhealthy until I was in my early 20s. I was slender, no extra body fat, not unhealthy.
I guess it just doesn't catch up with a lot of people until, you get into your 20s.
Well, it's like going from being very active to then being in college and doing a lot of sitting and studying didn't help, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because I was very active up until that point. And then college hit and you're bombarded with all these courses to take and lots of studying and all that. So, but interesting. Okay. All right. Where are we? You want to, where'd you leave off, Carrie?
Where it says Cooper summarized his dietary recommendations, and you're going to love this.
Okay.
You want to
pick up, Kim?
I was going to have her read that, but I guess does that go with the next? It's hard to tell.
It is hard to tell. I'll read this part and then you can start in the next paragraph. Okay. So Cooper summarized his dietary recommendations. I think in order to have an effective reduction of weight, we have to focus on reducing fat intake. I personally believe there is some benefit to reducing our preoccupation with sweet things. I would recommend an appropriate amount of protein intake, a healthy intake of fresh fruits and vegetables with substantial fiber content. Oh, there's that fiber. It is very attractive for me to say, stop eating commercially prepared foods.
That is a crazy summary because there are so many subjective terms in there.
Yeah.
And stop eating commercially prepared foods. Like that's a shocker because that's literally when they started to really do it. They ramped it up after that.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's his personal belief. I mean, this is how, this is what our government officials are listening to, right?
Oh.
And yeah, and he doesn't define sweet things, which is pretty obvious, but still he doesn't define sweet things. An appropriate amount of protein.
What the heck is that?
How much is that? A healthy intake. These are the words that he's using. Crazy.
Okay, so interestingly, Cooper also confirmed the adage, you can't outrun a bad diet. Exercise, unless you're into quite heavy labor, where your total energy expenditure is in the several thousands of calories, like tree chopping or lumber workers, is really not the main determinant of weight loss. A year later, on 11th January 1977, Senator McGovern announced the outcome of his committee's deliberations, the publication of the Dietary Goals of the United States. In his prepared statement, Senator McGovern began, "The simple fact is that our diets have changed radically within the last 50 years, with great and often very harmful effects on our health. These dietary changes represent as great a threat to public health as smoking. Too much fat, too much sugar or salt, can be and are linked directly to heart disease, cancer, obesity, and stroke, among other killer diseases. In all, 6 of the 10 leading causes of death in the United States have been linked to our diet. Those of us within government have an obligation to acknowledge this. The public wants some guidance, wants to know the truth, and hopefully today we can lay the cornerstone for building of better health of all Americans through better nutrition. Last year, every man, woman, and child in the United States consumed 125 pounds of fat and 100 pounds of sugar. As you can see from our displays, that's a formidable quantity of fat and sugar. The consumption of soft drinks has more than doubled since 1960, displacing milk as second most consumed beverage. In 1975, we drank on the average of 295 12-ounce cans of soda. In the early 1900s, almost 40% of our caloric intake came from fruit, vegetable, and grain products. Today, a little more than 20% of calories comes from these sources. McGovern indicated that his committee should set forth the necessary plan of action. Number 1, 6 basic goals are set for changes in our national diet. Number 2, simple buying guides are recommended to help consumers attain these goals. And number 3, recommendations are also made for action within government and industry to better maximize nutritional health. The 6 specific 1977 USDA DGA goals were those described earlier.
Interesting that can you imagine if he said fat and sugar, Can you imagine if they just decided to focus on sugar, actually take a scientific approach. And instead of recommending that you cut back or eliminate both of them, pick sugar.
I think, I think part of what they were seeing was that there was such a significant increase in sugar. And if you're eating that much sugar, if you eat fat with it, you eat high fat and high sugar, that's really bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's really bad to eat sugar, and it's really bad to eat fat and sugar together. So then I think they determined, oh, well, eating fat must be bad too then,
Yeah, but I mean, if they had they decided to recommend reducing, even if they picked fat first, if they had said, okay, I want everybody to reduce your fat and don't change anything else, they probably would have seen that people didn't get better. And they may have seen even that people felt worse. And, hopefully that would have changed, but they did the very unscientific thing and recommended a reduction in both. And so then,
and it's almost as if they did it and they just didn't look back,
Right. Literally.
Yeah, there was no, let's reevaluate in 2 years or anything, or 5 years even.
I guess there was some sort of reevaluation during the 80s, and that's when the whole, instead of the food pyramid, it changed to the My Plate. I remember very distinctly when I was in elementary school that happening. But it's it still feels like it was kind of a lot of the same.
It was just on a plate instead of in a pyramid.
I would have to hold them up side by side to see what they actually changed, because I remember thinking, even as a child, that looks pretty much the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. All right. So let's see. I'll take the next. Well, the next section is really small. So 1.3.3 is the people behind the 1977 USDA dietary goals for America. So the 1977 USDA DGA were compiled by a vegetarian, Nick Motern, who had no formal training in nutrition science, assisted by a committee of quote-unquote lawyers and ex-journalists. We are totally naive, said the staff director, Marshall Matz, a bunch of kids who just thought, hell, we would say something on this subject before we go out of business. Motern and the committee identified the 6 dietary goals that have fashioned the nutrition debate ever since. These remain the basis for the dietary advice provided by traditionally trained dietitians and doctors, regardless of where they trained. I remember, didn't Nina Teicholz talk about this in her book, in him?
Yeah, Nina did, and so did Tom McNaughton in Fathead. And that video also has, it's a documentary, and it also has McGovern hearing footage in it too.
Yeah, and I remember Nina's book when she talked about Nick Moturn, she described him kind of similar, that he was kind of a young guy that didn't have any training, and then didn't he end up becoming like the expert that they all listened to, and he kind of got this really like esteemed position as far as the way they viewed him. I remember a whole section where she talked about this guy, where he went from nothing and a nobody to their go-to person.
All the names run together. There were so many names, particularly in Nina's book, that it was just overwhelming to me.
Yeah, but I do specifically remember him in talking about this kid with no credentials suddenly calling the shots when it comes to the nutrition for the whole country. Yeah.
Wow.
So, all right, well, that was a small section.
Do you want
me to read a little bit of the next section too?
Yeah.
Okay, so the next section is how the dietary goals for Americans were received. So on their publication, the dietary goals were severely criticized by many, including Philip Handler, PhD, Pete Ahrens, MD, R. Reisner, MD, a whole bunch of other people that I'm not going to name off here. Dr. Philip Handler, then president of the National Science Academy, posed the question: what right has the federal government to propose that the American people conduct a vast nutritional experiment with themselves as the subject, on the strength of so very little evidence that it will do them any good? Resolution of this dilemma turns on value judgment. The dilemma so posed is not a scientific question. It is a question of ethics, morals, and politics. Those who argue either position strongly are expressing their values. They are not expressing scientific judgments. Dr. E.H. Peter Ahrens, known for his original work, including describing the production of hypertriglyceridemia by the ingestion of either carbohydrates or fats, noted, a trial of the low-fat diet recommended by the McGovern Committee and the American Heart Association has never been carried out. It seems that the proponents of this dietary change are willing to advocate an untested diet to the nation on the basis of suggested evidence obtained in tests of a different diet. This illogic is presumably justified by the belief that benefits will be obtained vis-a-vis coronary heart disease prevention by any diet that causes a reduction in plasma lipid levels. I believe it is anything but a service to the public to postulate one dietary solution for hyperlipidemia, no matter how well-meaning one is in advocating it. Let us address the unanswered questions and demand the means to solve them quickly. So his criticisms covered 4 subjects. So the first, there has been no previous test of the prudent diet, quote unquote prudent diet. Secondly, the prudent diet will have only a small effect on plasma lipid concentrations. Third, any one diet produces different results in different people. And lastly, crucial questions remain to be resolved. They relate specifically to the nature of the dietary fats that should be prescribed and very differential effects on the blood lipoproteins, chylomicrons, HLDL, HDL, and LDL cholesterol. So he sounded like he was more on the right track, this guy. Aren't these the guys that end up getting kind of like run off?
Yeah, because Mann didn't he do some study on like indigenous populations, and I think he did some study on the Inuit. He was from Vanderbilt, and we talked about him, I believe, in Nina's book, and I think he was also mentioned earlier here.
Yeah, he was one of the voices trying to, bring some reason to the discussion, and they didn't want
Oh,
to.
and hello, he was a director of the Framingham Diet Heart Study too.
Oh,
Boy, yeah, there was that.
yeah,
That
interesting.
old thing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, a little section left here. So George V. Mann, MD, who had resigned as director of the Framingham Diet Heart Study when he realized that politics had trumped science, complained that the level of fat in the diet has not been related causally to any disease, and in particular not to either obesity or to cancer. Those who contend this are adventurists. The amount of saturated fat in the diet has not been shown causal for any disease. The release of this document is a nutritional debacle.
Well, he
Man's,
was right on the money.
yeah, he was right on the money. Man's skepticism arose following his discovery that the dietary findings in the Framingham Diet Heart Study had been hidden when it became apparent that those with established coronary heart disease did not eat any more fat or saturated fat than did those free of coronary heart disease in the same Framingham population. And then it says the commissions of, like, and it lists like 8 different people, doctors, concurred with these criticisms. So we had people trying to be a voice of reason. So So they started with, I guess he's saying they started with a bunch of people, like the study had a bunch of people with coronary heart disease, and they didn't even look at the baseline of these people, that the diets, that there was no difference even from the get-go from people who ate higher amounts of fat versus people who ate lower amounts of fat.
And of course, also from that same study, they determined that the cholesterol levels had nothing to do with their coronary heart disease either, or
Right,
atherosclerosis.
right, right. Of course, it didn't change anything.
Yep.
So, all right. You want to
Wow.
you want to go one more little section here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. All right, Carrie, you're up. You're up.
I'm up to bat. Okay. 1.3.5, the second edition of the USDA Dietary Goals for Americans. Oh boy, as if the first one wasn't enough, we're going to have a second. 1.3.5.1, cautionary statements. A second edition of the Dietary Goals was subsequently published also in 1977. An addition statement from Senators Percy, Schweiker, and Zrinski was appended, indicating that they had all significant concerns about the scientific credibility of the guidelines. Despite the many improvements reflected in this second edition, however, I have serious reservations about certain aspects of the report. I have become increasingly aware of the lack of consensus among nutrition scientists and other health professionals regarding the question of whether advocating a specific restriction of dietary cholesterol intake to the general public is warranted at this time. The question of what would be the demonstrable benefits to the individual and the general public, especially in regard to coronary heart disease, from implementing the dietary practices recommended in this report. And 3, the accuracy of some of the goals and recommendations given the inadequacy of current food intake data. On the question of whether or not a restriction of dietary cholesterol intake for the general populace is a wise thing to consider to recommend at this time, the senators wrote, in October 1977, the Canadian Department of Health and Welfare reversed its earlier position and concluded in a national dietary position that evidence is mounting that dietary cholesterol may not be important to the great majority of people. Thus, a diet restricted in cholesterol would not be necessary for the general population. A similar conclusion was drawn in 1974 by the Committee on Medical Aspects of Food in its report to Great Britain's Department of Health and Social Security. Because of these divergent viewpoints, it is clear that science has not progressed to the point where we can recommend to the general public that cholesterol intake be limited to a specified amount. The variances between different individuals are simply too great.
That makes me really irritated to see that this was being talked about back in the mid 1970s.
Yep.
And it's like it fell on completely deaf ears, because what's the most prescribed drug out there? Statins, right? It's like,
well, yeah. At present, it's probably soon going to be Ozempic and all those other ones.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
And
but
50
historically,
years
it's like,
later.
yeah, one of the most prescribed drugs out there. It's like the senators, and this was a senator that wrote this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so what did the pharmaceutical lobbyists get to them or something? I don't know what happened.
I think they were just
Like 50 years
steamrolled.
later, we have it feels like we're no further than we were there.
It feels like we're worse.
Yeah.
Because the messaging has been going on for 50 years that dietary cholesterol is bad.
So at this point, it's just, propaganda, and people believe it. If they hear it enough, they believe it as, fact.
Yeah. And we're following a crazy fad diet, or we're conspiracy theorists if we question that.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting.
I don't know. The senators next questioned whether there was consensus of a causative link between a specific diet and increased risk of coronary heart disease. For example, Dr. Jeremiah Stamler, chairman of the Department of Preventive Medicine, Northwestern School of Medicine, strongly believes thousands of premature coronary heart disease deaths can probably be prevented annually through dietary change. However, Dr. E.H. Ahrens, Jr., professor of medicine at Rockefeller University, told the Select Committee in March, advice to the public on changing its dietary habits in hope of reducing the rate of new events of coronary heart disease is premature, hence unwise. They continued by highlighting the different opinions of those who either supported or opposed Key's hypotheses. The same polarity is evidenced when one compares the view of William Cannell, Bannington Heart Studies Director. The dietary goals could have a substantial effect in reducing coronary heart disease, with the opinion of Vanderbilt University's Dr. George Mann that no diet therapy has been shown effective for the prevention or treatment of that disease. On behalf of the three senators, Percy concluded, I recognize the desirability of providing dietary guidance to the public and in helping the consumer become more responsible for everyday health status. In my judgment, however, the best way to do this is to fully inform the public, not only about what is known, but also about what remains controversial regarding cholesterol, the benefits of dietary change, and the reliability of current food intake data. Only then will it be possible for the individual consumer to respond optimally to the dietary goals in this report. Well, dadgum.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that, because when we were talking just a little while ago about like the quality of clinical trials, I didn't say anything, but what I was thinking was it kind of would be nice, like when you talk about the conclusions of a study, first of all, they need to be accurate, but it would be really helpful to say, okay, this is the conclusion you can draw from the study, but then maybe list some things that can't, like, but it doesn't prove this, it doesn't prove that, because people tend to extrapolate, right? And that's how we end up with all of these conclusions, and the news will say something that wasn't even part of the study. And so he's kind of basically alluding to that, inform the public not only about what is known, but about what remains controversial, or I'd say even, what a study can't tell you. Like you can't draw this conclusion from this study, so don't even go there. But we know our news media, and this is I think it was Ty Schultz that in her book she talked about what you'd hear in the news, or was that Dr. Barry? We've read so many books.
I think they all of them mention that to a point, about how that there might be like a headline, and most people just don't even go beyond that. And then when you actually look at the headline and some, depending, like I don't know, Tufts School of Medicine, for example, and various ones actually hold these press conferences and will say something. But then when you actually look at what it is that they're announcing, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. It was kind of like the whole meat causes cancer. I mean, well, that there's that one, but the meat causes diabetes thing that came out. And when you actually start looking at it, anybody that's got any sense is like, well, you count lasagna as a meat. Hello, what's wrong with this picture? Pizza is a meat.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But I mean, granted, most people don't eat meat the way that we eat it, but still, that's ridiculous.
Well, there's enough of us now out there that we could definitely be considered a control group or a study group,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what I mean is they can't really classify. I mean, most people don't just eat the meat by itself. You know what I'm saying? So
right.
Well, but what they could do though is, for example, like if they talked about a serving of meat, it could be more something along the lines of, a steak versus, I mean, like lasagna and stuff like that would just be pasta. Or I don't even know that you would even count that because it's got so many ingredients.
If you pulled the amount of meat that's actually in lasagna, I would think it would be very little. Unless you're eating, my lasagna, which I used to just use like a lot of meat because I like them. But I think that most lasagnas are pretty sparse when it comes to meat.
And the sauces contain a lot of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you make your sauce from scratch and you're not adding a bunch of sugar to it, a lot of people, those ones that you get at the store, I'm sure they're packed with sugar.
And then not to mention the noodles, which is basically what it is.
Yeah, full of carbs. So, all righty. All right, let's do the one more section and maybe we can call it quits there. You want to grab that last one, Kim?
Material changes. The second edition of the Dietary Goals also included some significant modifications of the original guidelines. Some suggest that the cattle industry in McGovern's home state of South Dakota was particularly unimpressed with his committee's recommendations. So the second edition no longer advised consumers to eat less meat. Instead, consumers were advised to reduce their intake of animal fat and choose meats, poultry, and fish, which will reduce saturated fat intake. The revised edition also removed any reference to restricting whole milk and egg consumption by young children and increased the suggested limit for adults' salt intake from 3 to 5 grams a day. This excluded non-discretionary salt in processed foods. As a result, the limit on salt intake was effectively increased to 8 grams a day. Perhaps under pressure from the fast food industry, the second edition also included the suggestion that on the whole, quick foods are a nutritious addition to a balanced diet.
Quick foods.
That's funny.
That's interesting. So this is when they started really pushing like boneless, skinless chicken breasts, which are so dry and boring.
In between McDonald's trips, though.
Right. Of course, because the quick foods are part of the balanced diet, right?
Yeah.
So, and
if you're already having a balanced diet, you can include some of those.
Yeah. We'll call that 80-20.
Yeah, there we go.
But 8 grams of sugar, that's a lot of salt. Is that just too
salt?
Yeah, 8 grams. Yeah, I corrected 8 grams of salt. That's a lot of salt.
Huh. Yeah, it really is. I mean, one of those element packs is 1,000, and people just balk when I drink
1 gram. Yeah, that's 1 gram.
Yeah.
8 grams is a lot of salt, but but if you're going to be recommending processed quick foods as part of a balanced diet, you got to make an allowance, right? because they usually contain a ton of sodium. Oh,
Yeah,
all right.
they contain a lot of everything.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
They is that yeah, they what you want. It's in there.
Yeah.
Who's paying us for this? Oh yeah, let's go ahead and
That's right. We're going to recommend based on whoever's, footing the bill and giving us money. So, all right. Okay. Well, that's a good place to stop.
Yeah, that's a good discussion and some very eye-opening things that I did not know.
Yeah, I mean, all the politics behind it is really interesting for sure. And to see, obviously there were different people involved in the argument, but we can see like who won the argument.
Mm-hmm.
And it did not help us in the long run for sure. So, all righty. So we'll pick up next week. And Kim, are you off work next Thursday?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Cool. Good. So we'll pick up next Thursday. I wanted to show you guys one thing before we leave. So I mean, I know I showed you the first book, but I got my copy of our second book.
Oh, look.
Cool.
Yeah, it's called Sugar QB, the Sugar Monster, and Superhuman Power Foods for Humanity.
That's cute.
Yeah, so it's really cute. So that's available, and Amy has not. She's going to present it to Dr. Barry. She's going to see him, I think, a week from Saturday at a conference.
Yep, I'm going to that one. That's the one I was talking about.
Yeah,
and it's sold out, y'all.
Oh, and so you'll be there.
Yeah, I will be there.
Okay.
I'll be there at the dinner.
Wow.
I'll be there at the dinner with the speakers on Friday night. My brother and I are going.
Okay.
And
I'll have to tell Amy to find you.
Yes, she needs to find me.
Yeah, but she's going to be presenting the book to Dr. Barry, and she's going to be recording while she's doing it because he hasn't seen it, and of course, he doesn't listen to us, so he doesn't know that his kids are in it, right? I think he may know that his kids are in it, but he hasn't seen the photos and everything, and I'm not sure what all he knows, but it's going to be cool when he finally takes a look at it. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Right.
Super cute. So, all righty. Well, that is it for this week. Glad you guys came, and hope everybody can catch the replay if you didn't make it.
Yep.
And any last words from you two?
I got nothing.
You don't know.
I got nothing. I'm going to try to stay up until a decent time so that I don't go to bed too early, so that I don't mess my sleep cycle up even worse than it already is. My sleep cycle.
Mine's been pretty bad lately.
Yeah, mine too. But from my own fault.
I've been staying up really late and then having to get up early because school started back, for my youngest.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe we can all make goals to try to get to sleep earlier.
Yes, I definitely have got to do something about my sleep. I've been trying some various things with the sleep hygiene. You read the same, and Dr. Barry talks about them too. And
what helped me is I did a Wim Hof breathing, guided breathing video.
Yes, and you sent that video to us, and I have not watched it yet. Thank you for the reminder. I'm going to do that tonight. I'm going to do that tonight.
Yeah, it definitely helps. I think I was probably asleep within maybe 5 minutes of finishing.
Wow. Okay. I'm in.
And I've done it more than
once. If I stay asleep, I'll even feel better because I really don't think, like, I do wake up at least once in the night, and then I notice, I need to go to the bathroom. But I don't think I needed to go to the bathroom bad enough that it woke me up. I think it was the fact that somehow when I woke up, then I notice it, and then of course you can't go back to sleep once you've noticed that. So if I can just keep going, keep sleeping, even for like 6 or 7 hours straight, I would be so happy.
Yeah.
I don't have any problems getting to sleep. I fall asleep very quickly and usually don't have any problems staying asleep. It's getting me upstairs to get in the bed to go to sleep. There's always something else that I can do before I have to go up there. And
yeah, that's my problem too.
Put it off.
But I did that for so long that I ended up having trouble going to sleep when I finally was trying to get to bed earlier. I would just lay there for hours.
Yeah.
So I've hopefully learned my lesson. I need to actually get to bed earlier, and then I do the Wim Hof breathing and I fall asleep. So, all righty. Well, we will sign off for today.
Bye, guys.